Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good people from all around the world who are joining us for the May edition of the Meetings of Minds. It doesn't feel like it's been a month since we were last gathered together and we had that fascinating conversation with Thilo, which was very much taking a practitioner approach. Today's Meetings of Minds, I'm very proud, first of all, because it's a member of the product team. It's a huge influential member of the product team who's going to be speaking with you and sharing some insights and thoughts and perceptions. But this is one of those sessions that as we started to discuss it and we started to consider what it might be about, and Sebastian, who I'll introduce in a moment, presented the theme that he'd like to discuss. It was that moment of going, really, we should have started from here. This is the context. This really does set the stage for the narrative about much of what it is that we choose to speak and consider when we start to look at these nutritional strategies and behaviors and alterations and things that we're trying to achieve from a health point of view. It's always good to know, well, what's the reality of the situation that we're dealing with? What is it, for want of a better word, that we're kind of up against? How does the landscape look before we start to take strides towards it and to emerge into that? And so that's very much really what today is going to take us into. And for sure, you are likely to hear and get insights and ideas that might challenge yours, which is great. I really hope it does. That's the best part of how these conversations can go. But I think also what you might find are some sentiments, some notions, some insights, some wisdom that will actually hit upon your shared thoughts and feelings. And so that is enough from me. I am as excited and interested as I hope all of you are to sit back and listen to this. So I would like to welcome front and center someone who it gives me extreme pleasure and pride to announce, someone who I work with on a daily, weekly basis, who is an asset not only to the product team, but to Zinzino. Sebastian, Jonsson, come forward, my friend. The stage is yours. Share with us your wisdom.
Thank you, Colin. I'm glad to be here. Can you hear me properly, first off?
Yes, we
awesome.
Can hear you.
All right, I'll go on for a bit of a rant for about 40-45 minutes, and then we'll open up for some questions. Yes, you see my screen, correct?
Yep, we can see your screen.
Then I just need to move you guys somewhere. There we go. All right, so today we will be diving into how society influences our behavior and how well our minds juggle current societal structures. Before we get into all of this, just some things to keep in mind. There are a lot of conflicting views in this area, and this presentation only gives a partial picture. And because of this complexity, I've also chosen to make a few simplifications to keep this talk shorter than an hour. For example, I'm very well aware of that we are all individuals with individual differences. All people do, for example, not make decisions the same way. Some are maximizers, some are satisficers, etc. And these are differences and things that I won't go into today. Just so we are aware of that. And it will be clear once we go through it all why I mentioned these things. And also, to be very clear from the start, this presentation assumes that we all know the benefits of choice and that we know that informed choice gives us feeling of control, agency, and empowerment, which are pleasant to us humans. So listen with an open mind, take away what you see fit. And some of the topics are a bit controversial, but doesn't that just make life a bit more interesting? So without further ado, the famous French philosopher Denis Diderot lived nearly his entire life in poverty. But all that changed in 1965. Diderot was 52 years old and his daughter was about to be married, but he could not afford to provide a dowry. Can you hear me even though that they are drilling in the background?
We can hear it a little bit, yeah, but just persist, my man. Don't worry. Forge through.
All right, awesome. So Diderot could not afford to provide a dowry. That is the money the bride's family used to pay the groom or his family at the time of marriage back in the day. Despite his lack of wealth, Diderot's name was well known because he was the co-founder and writer of, and this is a French pronunciation, so bear with me, but something like encyclopédie or something like that. It was, anyway, one of the most comprehensive encyclopedias of the time. When Catherine the Great, the Empress of Russia, heard of Diderot's financial troubles, she offered to buy his library from him for 1,000 Great British pounds, which is approximately 50,000 euro today. Suddenly, Diderot had money to spare. Shortly after this lucky sale, Diderot acquired a new scarlet robe. And that's when everything went wrong. Diderot's scarlet robe was beautiful. So beautiful, in fact, that he immediately noticed how out of place it seemed when surrounded by the rest of his common possessions. In his words, there was no more coordination, no more unity, no more beauty between his robe and the rest of his items. The philosopher soon felt the urge to buy some new things to match the beauty of his robe. He replaced his old rug with a new one from Damascus. He decorated his home with beautiful sculptures and a better kitchen table. He bought a new mirror to place above the mantle, and his straw chair was relegated to the antechamber by a leather chair. These reactive purchases have become known as the Diderot effect. And the Diderot effect states that obtaining a new possession often creates a spiral of consumption, which leads you to acquire more new things. As a result, we end up buying things that our previous selves never needed to feel happy or fulfilled. So why do we start here when we are to talk about why Cincino and Cincino products are needed in today's society? Simply because when we dissect things like Diderot effect, where we suddenly become dissatisfied and unhappy with possessions that we the day before were perfectly content with, we start to realize that we are not as rational creatures as we many times try to give ourselves credit for. And that could be fine. It is, for example, okay to buy things on social norms and to try to influence our perceived identity through things rather than just buying things for the sole benefit that it provides. But living in an increasingly complex society, unaware of many of our own biases, that is systematic errors in our thinking, we easily become victims to societal structures and marketing tactics that many times are good for profits for corporations, but not necessarily so for our own wallets and our health and well-being. Take my dear friends, for example. Most of them strive to eat a healthy diet, yet when I give them a balance test, they have really poor values. There can be almost an infinite amount of reasons why that is, like the lack of IQ, for example, but when we dig a bit deeper, they are not alone. A whopping 97% of all people who are taking the balance test do not have optimal fatty acid values. So today, we're going to spend some time looking at some of the things that on a more behavioral level affect our dietary choices. Why is it that we believe to eat healthy when many times we do not? And with all information available, why is it still hard to understand what type of diet is the best one? So first, we will have a look at freedom and how that is understood in contemporary society. We will look at choice and if more choice actually equals more freedom. We'll take examples from the work done by Daniel Kahneman on our decision making and where it tends to go wrong. Look at if it's viable to believe that we will be able to make proper good, and look at if it's viable to believe that we will be able to make good, proper decisions in today's society with all the information available. And lastly, we're going to connect it all with how Cincino can help us in this. So freedom. Let's start here. Freedom is a central part of contemporary society, where, for example, the United States even call themselves the land of the free. And the definition of freedom is, according to the Cambridge Dictionary, the condition or right of being able or allowed to do, say, think, etc., whatever you want to, without being controlled or limited. In Western societies and in many other parts of the world, this is more important than anything else. So in contemporary society, when people think about freedom, they tend to connect it to being able to choose. The more choice we have, the more free we must be. One example of this that I thought was both sad and funny happened when I stood in line at the grocery store. See, in Sweden, there is a movement to phase out single-use plastics. When you're at the cashier, bags lay so you can pick them up by yourself. So you can choose if you want a paper bag, a plastic bag, or the more environmentally friendly bags that you can use over and over again. But in striving to reduce single-use plastic, this particular store had taken drastic measures. They had put the plastic bags behind the counter. And this was something that the middle-aged man in front of me just simply could not accept. He started yelling at the cashier that he is a grown man and the store have no right to decide for him which type of bag he was going to use. That was to take it too far. See, his understanding of what was going on was that someone was trying to control him and force him into a specific behavior. And no matter if that was for a good reason or not, that would be to limit his freedom, and that cannot be accepted. And to be honest, it's not hard to understand his reaction. It definitely seems to be that they are trying to force him into a specific behavior. What he, however, failed to understand was that it was not just through plastic bags they did it. Everything in that store is decided by someone else. There is enormous amount of money and resources that have gone into studying in-store behaviors and consumers. And I even tend to have first-hand experience of this, since I both have studied in-store behaviors and worked with grocery stores to develop their sales. So I want to stress this. Almost everything in them are designed for profit. In some countries, there are some regulations that also favor positive purchase behaviors, but in general, everything is thought out for profit. Why do you, for example, think that most grocery stores are built so that you walk anti-clockwise? Because most people are right-handed. So by building them anti-clockwise, there will be more shelf meters on your right-hand side, which makes it easier for right-handed people, which are the majority of people, to pick groceries from the shelves. This in turn makes these stores to consistently have higher sales than clockwise built stores. Other tools used to store disposal is, for example, placement and pricing. With the correct placement of a grocery, sales many times by hundreds of %. Not because people all of a sudden have a greater need for it, but because the right placement with the correct price products next to it triggers impulse purchase behaviors, and steers people to a particular grocery and not another. See, because of the sheer amount of items in a grocery store, we become blind to what's in there, which then makes us susceptible to these placement tactics. The way to combat this, for us now enlightened individuals, is to use and stick to shopping lists. See, when we write them, we tend to write down what we actually need. So if anyone here wants to cut down grocery costs, and most other costs as well for that matter, try 1 month to shop without the shopping list, and then the next one to shop with one that you stick to, and then after compare the results. The example with the grocery store and the fact that it is an environment with a lot of products and choices in a small space begs us to ask the question, is more choice always better? It has, for example, been contested by Barry Schwartz, who wrote the book, The Paradox of Choice. Barry means that the official dogma in all Western industrialized societies goes like this. And I know that if you're on a phone now, you won't be able to read this, but I'll read it out for you. So, if we are interested in maximizing the welfare of our citizens, the way to do that is to maximize individual freedom. The reason for this is that freedom is in and of itself good, valuable, and essential to being human. And if each of us have freedom, then each and every one of us can act on our own to do the things that maximize our welfare, and no one has to decide on our behalf. The way to maximize freedom is to maximize choice. The more choice people have, the more freedom they have, and the more freedom they have, the more welfare they have. In his book, Barry has quite a telling example of what he alludes to. Back in the day when he went and bought pants, there was not a lot of different pants to choose from. So he bought a pair and did not think too much about them afterwards. However, today he spends an hour picking a pair of jeans, and when he finally picks one, he finds himself a little bit dissatisfied because they are a little bit off in this place over here and a little bit off in that place over there. With all the choices of pants, he should have been able to pick the perfect one. Yet, when he finally made his decision, he feels that he probably should have gone for a different one. Deconstructing what happens to Barry, there are four main ideas behind the paradox of choice, and why more choice is not always better. And the first one is paralysis rather than liberation. For many people, just picking between a few different choices are many times difficult. And with an increasing amount of choice, it can be really hard to know what to pick, and this can become overwhelming. And we can apply this to almost anything in today's society, such as food, clothes, entertainment, but also in countries like Sweden, things that was previously given, such as which school to go to, what education to choose, and which city to live in. The second thing that affects Barry in his jeans choice is something called opportunity cost. How much we value something tend to be in relation to what we compare it to. When we do pick something with all alternatives out there, we tend to think about how we wished we would have picked something else instead. It is easy to imagine the good parts of what was rejected when there are so many choices. So we become nagged in our heads that we miss the opportunity to choose something else. This is something that every marketeer knows about, because opportunity cost takes away from how happy you feel with the current decision, and is something that needs to be managed from a marketing perspective so customers come back. The third thing that has happened to Barry when he bought his jeans in today's society is something called escalation of expectation. With an increased number of choices, we start to escalate our expectations about, for example, how good a pair of jeans should fit. With all choices, they better be perfect. And when our expectation is that something has to be perfect for us to be satisfied, we more often than not tend to get disappointment. And the fourth thing that happens to Barry, that is self-blame. When we have so many choices to pick from, if something goes wrong, it must be my own fault. If the pants are not perfect in today's society, it must be my fault for choosing the wrong one. Whereas previously, if the pants were not perfect, at least it was the store or the manufacturer or the world at large's fault. So the difference is that previously we could blame other things, but today we start to blame ourselves for making bad choices. With all the choices in contemporary society, you, me, and everyone else are consistently making poor, irrational decisions. Yet, many of us, and me definitely, are not always aware of it, and we desperately try to cling on to the notion that we can control and understand society, and that we have the cognitive ability to figure this all out. And we could believe that, but then in came Daniel Kahneman. He's a psychologist and behavioral economist. And through a number of studies and experiments, he started to find that we as human beings have something called biases in our thinking. And these biases are systematic errors that we consistently are susceptible to do. Luckily, at least they are not that many. Not true. Unfortunately, our minds are clouded with these biases. And there is no point in going through each of them. And this picture by no means include all of the different types of biases we have, but a couple of examples to consider are confirmation bias. So that is, we are drawn to details that confirm our own existing beliefs. So when scrolling through social media, we stop at things confirming our view of a certain thing. And then algorithms learn that and continue to feed us with it. So can that also be one of the reasons why people who follow a special diet seem to continuously find why that particular diet is the best one? We also have the bandwagon effect. That is that we tend to do or believe that when we tend, or the bandwagon effect is that we tend to do or believe in something, not because we actually believe in it, but because the rest of the world believes in it. And this happens a lot to us. We tend to vote for candidates that are the most popular without actually knowing what they stand for. And when all seem to agree on something in meetings, we tend to agree with them, even though we prior to it were of a different opinion. Same with food. Most of us eat and drink as the people in our surroundings. Because if everyone else is eating or drinking this way, it cannot be that bad, right? And then we have the ostrich bias, head in the sand. And that is that we tend to ignore negative information. And it goes beyond just looking for positive information, and as in the confirmation bias. Rather, when there is negative information, we tend to look at it as an outlier. So I'm a vegetarian, for example, and there are a lot of information about why good grass-fed meat is good for us. For me, though, it's much more convenient to look at these studies as manipulated and wrong than to acknowledge the fact that my dietary choices also have negative aspects. With these different biases that we might be aware of, or unaware of, Dan Ariely and other behavior economists found something in relation to this that is called cognitive illusions. And to understand what it talks about and how illusions work, let's use the Shepherd table illusion as an example why it is so hard for us, even in the cases that we are aware of that we have a bias, to actually see it and act on it. So we have two tables. Which one is the longer one? And everyone can see that the table on the right is the longer one. But now look, both of these rulers have the exact same length, and they show that the table are of the exact same length as well. And now you might think, okay, but you manipulated the rulers. So I'm gonna try to exit this presentation and see if I can show you. Here we go. So here we have the two rulers. Take the one to the left, turn it around, move it over, and they are of the exact same length. Then move them back. Okay, good enough. So now we know that both of the tables are the exact same length. Yet, when we remove the rulers, we have the same damn illusion. We know that the tables are of the same length, yet it is impossible for us to see it. And this is where we start to get to the truly juicy parts of how our mind works, but that very few of us actually are aware of. See, we do not only have these illusions for visual things. They are there for our cognitive biases as well. And once we get to know about them, these cognitive biases, the logical thought is that we need to learn them and incorporate them into our lives so that we stop to do them. But what this visual illusion aims to demonstrate is that even when we know our mind is tricking us, it continues to do so over and over again. This example is of a visual illusion, but we have other cognitive illusions as well. But they are not, but yes, and we have cognitive illusions as well. And they're not as easily demonstrated, but here is one with quite big societal implications. This table is from a study back in 2003, which looked at organ donation rates in Europe. It seems to be two different types of countries. Countries that give a lot of organ donations and countries that give a little. But why is it then such a difference? When the study asked these questions, people tended to think it had to do about culture, how much people cared about other people. Other people, when asked, thought it was about religion. But when we look at the countries that we think is very similar culturally, such as Sweden and Denmark and Germany and Austria, these countries have vastly different results. The difference between them is as simple as how a particular question about organ donation was asked. In the countries to the left, they were asked to check a box if they wanted to donate their organs. Whereas for the countries on the left, the citizen needed to check the box if they did not want to give their organs. In the first instance, for the countries on the left, people did not check the box and did not join the program. However, for the countries on the right, people also did not check the box and join the program. Same action, very different outcomes. You might think this is because the question tricked people into answering differently, or that since it is something that happens after we die, people do not really care enough to answer. But this study actually found that it was such a hard and important topic for people, so they become averse to answering it because they did not know what to answer. So their solution to it was then to do nothing. And by doing nothing, depending on how it was designed, we got very different results. So what does this actually then tell us? Think about it. My fellow middle-aged man in front of me at the grocery store wakes up in the morning feeling like he is in control. He goes to the closet and he feels he puts on what he decides to wear, goes to the refrigerator and eats what he decides to eat. But what these type of studies actually tell us, together with earlier in this presentation about how stores influence our behavior, is that many of these decisions that we believe to reside within us actually reside with the person designing the form or the grocery store or the society at large. The challenge for us is that we have such a strong feeling that we are in control and that we are making the decision that it's very hard for us to accept even the idea that we might have an illusion of making a decision rather than making an actual decision ourselves. So lastly, let's put our smartphone into the equation. See, today we have access to more information 24/7 than ever before. In fact, at our hands' disposal, we can access almost all of humans' cumulative knowledge at any given time. We can read why a carnivore diet is the best diet for our health, and then in the next instance, read an article where we get told a vegan diet is the best for longevity. We reach information teaching us that we do best eating many small portions throughout the day. But we also access information about how intermittent fasting is best for our health. The vast and many times contradicting information constantly at our hands can both be liberating and paralyzing. So what's the point I'm trying to make with all of this? Obviously, it must be this. We are all stupid. We have the wrong idea what freedom is. We cannot handle choice. We have systematic errors in our thinking and decision making. And even when we know that we have them, we are so infinitely stupid that we continue to do them. On top of it all, we have devices that give us knowledge, all the knowledge in the world, yet we cannot handle them. It's actually something completely different that I'm trying to get across. Together, we have been able to create societies that are extremely complex. We can do things today that compared to previously in human history seem like they are taken from a science fiction movie. But this is also coming with a cost. See, today in this complex society, we have just about infinite variables that influence our life. The tasks alone make all decisions needed to lead meaningful and healthy lives should therefore not be a burden for the individual. And we even instinctively know this. We are all social creatures by nature. For example, one experiment that examined the role of social norms looked at meat consumption and how the belief that a norm is changed and how the belief that a norm is changing influences behavior. So the experiment tested people's likelihood to order a meat-based lunch. People standing in line at the university, at the university campus cafe, read statements describing either how some people limit how much meat they eat. So, and that is a static statement. Some people limit. Or they got the statement, some people are starting to limit how much meat they eat, which is a dynamic statement. Lunchgoers who read the dynamic statement were twice as likely to order a meatless meal than those in the static group, so 24% instead of 17%. An important aspect of these studies, there were several of them, the researcher pointed out, is that the participants were never asked to change their behavior or even told the benefits of doing a change. They were just giving information about change and then interpreted that into that the norm about meat was changing and therefore changed the behavior accordingly. So deep down in ourselves, we know that we need social and societal structures that help us make good decisions. Me personally, for example, would love to go to grocery stores where I do not actively have to seek environmentally friendly and healthy alternatives, but that all choices in them already are. So my main concern would be what type of dish I was craving for the day. But today, I instead need to consider the type of food container used and its hormonal and environmental impact, if it has been grown in a sustainable manner, what type of pesticides it might have been exposed to, among all other aspects I need to consider to do sustainable, ethical food choices. And these are for food, which is an area that I at least work within and I'm interested in. But what about the materials used in the apartment I live? What my clothes are made of, the rubber used for the bike tires I use, the material in my computer, and so on. So once we start to think in this manner, we quickly start to realize that we need social norms and social structures that help us make good informed decisions about our health. However, if you're like me and have concerns about public health and the food choices driven by our societies, we need to find subcultures that can support us. That is exactly what Cincino are for all of us and can be for even more people in the future. And I will go through some aspects that make Cincino a company that stand out from the crowd. First, we are test-based. See, we have talked about that too many choices and too much information is hard for us to make sense of. By providing tests, Cincino enable us to cut through the noise of all different opinions out there and simply test if the diet we are currently on are supporting our health or not. By getting hard facts about our own health, we can then make informed dietary choices that make us feel in control and empowered about our own health. And almost even better, the tests help us with our own biases and illusions, because no matter how much of a bias we have towards a specific diet, by testing ourselves, we can check if the diet we believe so strongly in actually is giving us the nutrients we need. And after taking a test, we do not any longer need to worry about if the decision we are making are an illusion or not, because we get hard data if they serve our health. Second, Cincino has a culture of openness. How often can you get access to the brains behind the products? At Cincino, through different events and Zoom calls and talk like this, you can get to actually meet and ask us questions. And yes, there is a business side to Cincino, But if you pay attention to the people that Zinzino have invested in and who are attracted to working at Zinzino, people like Emma Lee, Ida, Paul, Angela, Colin, so on, they have spent their lives working for and researching how to create better public health. And without putting too many words in their mouths, they can speak for themselves, but you can be certain that the drive for motivation for them is to help people lead healthier lives. So in a time when it can be hard to know which is a reliable source and which one is not, Zinzino is a source of information to be trusted, because we are all good altruistic people. Just kidding. It is because it is in all our interest to provide good, reliable information, because if we do not, the tests will show it, leading to that our whole business model will fail. So moving forward, developing tests and information that enhance public health, as you've heard Dag, Örjan, and Hilde talk about, is high on the agenda for Zinzino. And this is something you will notice in upcoming product launches. Hint, hint. Lastly, to wrap this up, by far the most valuable thing about Zinzino is all of your partners, all of your customers, and all of your health practitioners that together brings an almost infinite amount of knowledge to the Zinzino network. Remember how we talked about that we need social norms and social structures that support healthy behaviors. Because when we have these in place, they provide a framework for us. And then within that framework, we can make informed choices about our health outcomes. And we can know this, but we also need to find these. And I've been around to events and seen how you support and build these frameworks in practice. And it's so incredibly valuable in today's society. Because yes, it is hard for the individual to get a full grasp of all different areas in life. But when we work and support each other, we can achieve incredible things. And Zinzino is built on this notion. So deep and it's deep at the core of the Zinzino business. It is built on that instead of competing against each other in sales for the biggest bonuses, we need to help each other and guide each other, because what is good for example, my downline is also good for me. Rant out.
What a great way to end the presentation. Rant out. Thank you very much. Fascinating. And I'm well aware of the fact that this is very kind of information and evidence-based. But there are some areas that I'd like us to just tap into and explore a little bit more, or maybe challenge against, because there was a provocative data, and I know there are people who've made comments, and there might be the old question in the box, and I will come to them. But there was a comment that you made with data that referred to the opt-in, opt-out with the organ donation, and that was actually I'm in the UK. I'm one of the ones that you showed had this really low uptake, and then they changed the rules. Believe it or not, they changed the rules to match that of the other one, where you were no longer actively opting in, you were passively opting in. And so I think what we hear a lot, Sebastian, and I'm interested in your thoughts on this, is that there's a level of opt-in required when you take a test. And sometimes there's a perception of a barrier around that, where people are thinking to themselves, well, how much faith can we have in the test? Is the test a device? So given the fact that we know there's a level of opt-in, what are your thoughts around how that can be best facilitated?
That's a great question. How should we make people don't feel like you need to opt in when taking a test? Honestly, I don't have a quick answer to that one. Do you have a thought on it? I guess you have.
No, I don't. I think it's a fascinating talking point, because I think this is a big part of what we deal with health centricity across the board. You know, we're at such a place in the 21st century where health seems to be a consumer choice for people, where actually health should be the default position. And actually, this is what I'd argue, is that, first of all, the preservation of self and the optimization of health is whereby you start from. So when you think of how you need to contribute professionally, personally, from an intimate point of view, personal relationships, all these things, first of all, there should be preservation of self and optimization of health, because that's who you need to be. And yet, we're at a place in life now where you have to proactively opt into health. And that just struck me when you talked about the donor subscription. I know that's very different, but it's a good example of where we find ourselves at, is that you're now having to proactively opt in. And we know that people are reluctant to do that. And the donor one you gave is a great example, but that's consistent where we see opt-in behavior across the board. And we changed the legislation. So on that point, in the UK, we changed the legislation to match where there was greater success. So it's fascinating. And there's people on here who are our partners and customers. They're dealing with this day to day. This is a challenge that's kind of quite deep rooted. So
it is a challenge. I have some thoughts of it, but I don't have a solution to how you wouldn't need to opt in to take a test. But I make these mind games to myself, for example. So when I finally, I had to opt in to change my diet, became a vegetarian, and I tried to half measure it first. And then I'll eat meat when I'm at work, and then at home I do not. And I fell in and out until I made a decision that, okay, it's not food. So when I go to a store and I see the meat dish, it's not food for me anymore. That's not part of my diet. And I think part of that where Cincino can help is to start to create, and that's already is what is happening, is to create the framework within, okay, what do we see as food? What do we eat? Where do we support our health with different supplements? And create this framework where we within this framework can make different dietary choices, but you have something to fall back on and lean on.
Yeah, and I agree. And I also think that what we need to do is consider that in the 21st century, we need 21st century solutions. And we need to recognize that there is a situation to unpack. I think, though, given the landscape that you've painted, which most of which I agree, I think that the biggest part of the problem we have is the control of narrative around food and how things are marketed and how things are promoted, and the nature in which people's, whether they realize it or not, ideas around health and food are manipulated through some quite aggressive advertising. And that to such an extent, we've blended our wants with what our needs, so that we think that we need our wants. And I think that some of the biggest global food manufacturers have done that very, it's quite sophisticated in how they've done that. So when we're dealing with someone now who's stepped forward, they want to start to make a positive change with regards to their health, and we start to talk to them about how we do it, we are really trying to offset a whole mindset and a global state of play, aren't we? That's the essence of what you're getting at. So here's an interesting one. We never do this, but let's do it. Where would you begin? So if you were the partner and you were having the conversation with someone, knowing what you know, with the awareness that you have, where would you begin?
I would begin that we together need to find our way. Because if we continue to follow contemporary narratives around food, we are likely, and apologize if this upsets anyone, but we are likely going to develop non-communicable disease. So what we then need to do as a partner and for customers and us working at Zinzino is to start to create a different norm for ourselves and to drive the narrative that we together have the ability to change this and to demand something else. And by being part of something bigger than ourselves, because today Zinzino is a global movement, then we can start to make proper change and make big changes in society. So by joining Zinzino, you can start to be part of all of this.
So that's where you'd start from. That's quite. That's a big statement, isn't it? I like it. And you know me well enough to know that I like that. I do find that that's a huge statement and a place to begin, though. I think for some people, there's almost an overwhelming foundation to that. But I do like it.
Yeah, and there we have, if you don't want to go that far, we simply have that you fall back on the test. And you start there. Because that is hard proof of, is your diet, because omega-3s are so important to our health. Are your omega-3 levels and is your balance good? And you can start there and then take it from there.
Which is bringing it right down to really a kind of, a real simple, refined, straightforward, measurable outcome. And I like that, obviously, as with someone with a research and a science background, I obviously like that. I just recognize that there are steps before that. Someone's thrown a comment in the box, which is true. Ignorance is bliss. Ignorance is bliss, and people quite ignorantly will walk down an avenue and then find out it was the wrong way at the point at which it can be too late, or certainly at the point that they've played so many compromises that it's going to be difficult to unpack. Let me just pick up. Let me see we've got loads of comments. What I'm starting to enjoy about the Meetings of Minds chat box now is that it's turned more into chat than it has questions. So this happened last time we were on. A ton of people who are kind of having their own conversation, which I love. But let me just pick one because we're running out of time, and I'd like someone else's voice to come forward. And Andrea has commented to everyone: we need more people to become empowered. And then surely informed choice will provide those who are empowered to make better choices for themselves. Most people are not informed, in my experience, as a nutritionist. So I'm going to ask you to comment on that, but I'd like to comment first, because I was having a chat with a good friend of mine who works in public health yesterday. And we were going back to our early days when we were both much younger. We had far less grey hair. And we were talking about how we came out of university thinking, wow, if people only knew, everything would change for the better. And then we've spent a long time telling everybody, and not much has changed. And I do 100% agree that information and knowledge is at the heart of manufacturing meaningful change. But I also think that we're at such a point now, and especially when we've got all this complexity around choice that Sebastian has so kind of articulately stated today and put forward for our consideration. I think that there's more than knowing. And I think that goes back to the test, where there's an evidence side, and often people like to use the word proof. But what do you think of that, Sebastian? What do you think? Because you're far more of a marketeer than I'll ever be. What do you think? Is it about broadening information?
Yeah, I definitely think that we need easy tools, because it's so easy to get lost and wrapped up in all the different opinions. And when you read on the internet, for example, everyone has a PhD and everyone has written a book and everyone has the perfect solution to everything. And it gets really confusing. And especially because when it comes to dietary choice, it often takes a long time before we see the effects of the choices that we make today. We need as simple tools as possible so that we can check that we are on track. And here I think the balance test, for example, is just a genius tool in this regard.
Strong comment. Strong comment. That takes us up really to the closing of the set. I mean, I think it's good to end on a strong comment from you, Sebastian, because we've kind of had 50 odd minutes of strong comments from you and awareness raising. And really, which I do think is vital and really important, is this setting the landscape. And so hopefully, and you can tell by the chat and the comments that are in the chat, people have found this really valuable. And I think it is an eye-opener. And I think it should just be the beginning of how we start to consider really the counter position to where we are. We are very much together, every single person on this call. We're trying to drive a meaningful change forward that is based on reason, that is based on a sense of logic, of evidence, of manufacturing a meaningful change in your health status based on facts. When a lot of what we're up against is irrational, is non-fact based, that lends itself to certain types of manipulated impulses. And so once we know what it is we're dealing with, hopefully that'll make us be better armed for when the people we're communicating with come to us with their questions and their concerns. And we realize that this is actually the normal state of play. And what we need to help those people do is deal with the noise, start to make a better decision, recognizing the terms on which decisions are effectively made. I think this has been fascinating, Sebastian. I also think that this has probably been, now that we've done it, maybe part one of what might be a 2 or 3 part theme for us to return to, because there's clearly so much more for us to consider, and specific avenues that you said at the start that we could probably venture off into and explore in a little bit more detail. But as for today, thank you, Sebastian. That was wonderful. I knew it will be. It's very thought-provoking. It's fascinating. I'd like to thank everybody for taking part, for being here, to dedicate this hour to spend some time to learn and to challenge maybe your own ideas or extend your own ideas. But I think I'll sign off with a stay well. We look forward to seeing you all in June, which will be same time, same place. There won't be one in July. We'll take a break in July. There will be one in June, so watch out for that announcement. But I'm going to hand back to Sebastian on this occasion for a final word to send everybody off for the month. What would you like to conclude with, Sebastian?
If there's anything I like to conclude with, then it is that our mind is a fascinating thing. And I would encourage each and everyone to explore it and do it in different ways. You can read Kahneman, for example, about different biases. You can go meditate and try to learn about how your own thoughts work, and you can go and just observe society and see how all of us actually act. And then we'll be back here in the future and we discuss more about our findings.
Superb. Well, once again, thank you, Sebastian. Thank you to all of you. May these thoughts be prompted and provoked, and we will look forward to greeting you all again in 1 month's time. Stay well. We'll see you at the next one. Thank you, Sebastian. Bye now.
Bye.